Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor, the legendary Hollywood star with mesmerizing violet eyes, remained just as mysterious in death as she was in life. Famous for her lavish lifestyle and an extraordinary career spanning decades, she left behind one final wish that left even her closest confidants in shock. She insisted on making a grand entrance at her own funeral, and not just figuratively, she meant it literally. Her instructions were precise. The ceremony was to start as planned, but her casket wouldn't arrive until exactly 15 minutes later. This wasn't some lighthearted prank. It was a bold, deliberate statement, a final act to ensure she would always be remembered as a woman who refused to follow the rules. And that's not all. Elizabeth, who walked down the aisle 8 times, also made sure she would be buried with a pair of her favorite diamond stud earrings, glistening gems rumored to be worth more than an entire house. Elizabeth Taylor's final resting place at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in California is completely unmarked, a shocking contrast to her extravagant, larger-than-life image. But why? Some believe she wanted to avoid turning her grave into a tourist hotspot, while others think it was her ultimate act of privacy after a lifetime in the unforgiving public eye. Even in death, she crafted a spectacle, ensuring her legacy remained as captivating and enigmatic as the dazzling jewels she treasured. Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford, the undisputed queen of melodrama and one of Hollywood's most controversial stars, left behind a final request as eerie as some of her most chilling performances. Despite her glamorous public image, her last wishes painted a stark picture of her fractured personal life. She insisted on being cremated and laid to rest in a simple crypt at Ferncliff Cemetery in New York, far from the glimmering lights of Hollywood. But the real shock wasn't where she was buried. It was what she refused to do. Joan deliberately cut her 2 eldest children, Christina and Christopher, out of her will, leaving them with nothing but a single ice-cold line, for reasons which are well known to them. Joan's decision only fueled the long-standing speculation about her bitter relationship with her children, rumors that exploded after Christina's explosive memoir, Mommy Dearest. In the book, Joan was portrayed as a ruthless, domineering mother, a stark contrast to her glamorous public image. Adding another layer of mystery, Joan's ashes were placed in a crypt beside her final husband, Alfred Steele, but the site itself? Shockingly modest, almost anonymous. For a woman who spent her life demanding the spotlight, her final resting place is hauntingly quiet, leaving behind more questions than answers about the real Joan Crawford and the secrets she took to the grave. Bela Lugosi. Bela Lugosi, the man who forever etched Count Dracula into Hollywood history, made a burial request so eerie it blurred the line between fiction and reality. When he passed away in the mid-20th century, his family honored his chilling wish to be buried in his full Dracula costume, complete with the legendary black cape. This wasn't some Hollywood stunt. It was deeply personal. But here's where it gets even more unsettling. Despite his fame, Bela Lugosi died nearly penniless. Years of typecasting and personal struggles left him forgotten by Hollywood. His funeral was a quiet affair, attended only by a small circle of close friends and family. Yet, in a twist of fate, his burial in the Dracula costume transformed his grave into a must-visit shrine for horror fans. Bela Lugosi's final wish wasn't just a tribute to his most iconic role. It was a chilling symbol of how the character consumed his life. Even in death, his resting place at Holy Cross Cemetery in California stands as a haunting testament to the man who became one with the monster he portrayed. Wallace Reed. Wallace Reed was the golden boy of silent cinema, a matinee idol whose face captivated audiences across the early 20th century. But behind his dazzling image was a tragic reality. When he died in the early 1920s, Hollywood was stunned, but it was his final burial request that truly left people speechless. Reed, once the very symbol of youth and charm, asked to be buried with one simple, yet deeply personal item: a silver locket holding a photograph of his wife, Dorothy Davenport. Pola Negri, Pola Negri, the mysterious siren of the silent film era, was just as famous for her passionate romances, shocking scandals, and endless reinventions as she was for her on-screen talent. But it was her final burial request that truly sealed her legacy as one of Hollywood's most eccentric stars. Negri, once romantically linked to the legendary Rudolph Valentino, made a jaw-dropping request that left even those closest to her in disbelief. She wanted to be buried with a vial of Valentino's ashes, a claim that immediately stirred controversy and skepticism. The truth? It remains a mystery. Valentino, who had died decades earlier, was never officially cremated, and to this day, there's no record of his ashes ever being given away. Yet, Negri swore she had a small portion of Valentino's ashes, a treasured memento from their intense but short-lived romance. Whether this was a heartfelt keepsake or a carefully crafted illusion, it only added to her enduring mystique. But the truth about the mysterious ashes? Still unknown. Was this her final act of undying love, or one last dramatic performance from a woman who never stopped commanding the spotlight? Tallulah Bankhead. Tallulah Bankhead, the electrifying actress with a husky voice and a wild, rebellious streak, made sure her final burial request was just as bold as the life she led. Tallulah, who was just as infamous for her outrageous off-screen behavior as she was for her acting, had one unforgettable wish. She wanted to be buried with a bottle of bourbon, a pack of cigarettes, a copy of her favorite book, the Bible. This bizarre yet revealing list captured the essence of who she was, a woman who embraced excess and rebellion but never fully let go of her sense of faith. Her funeral, held in the early 1960s, was a solemn affair, but her burial instructions made sure there was still a hint of her trademark irreverence. But here's a detail many don't know. Tallulah's final resting place isn't in Hollywood. Instead, she chose St. Paul's Churchyard in Maryland, a world away from the spotlight. Why? Because it was close to her family's roots. A surprisingly sentimental choice for a woman who spent her life rebelling against convention. Even in death, Tallulah Bankhead managed to weave humor, defiance, and unexpected sentiment into her story, ensuring her legacy remains just as unforgettable as she was. Clark Gable. Clark Gable left behind a burial request that exposed a deeply personal truth about the man behind the legend. When Gable passed away in the early 1960s, he was laid to rest at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in California. But the true significance lies in where he chose to be buried. He made sure his final resting place was beside his third wife, Carole Lombard, the one true love of his life. Lombard's tragic death in the early 1940s shattered him, and he carried that heartbreak until the day he died. Even though he remarried twice, he left no doubt about where he truly belonged, by Carole's side, forever. What makes Gable's burial even more heartbreaking is its simplicity. His grave is marked only by a modest plaque, a stark contrast to the larger-than-life persona he carried in Hollywood. Errol Flynn. Errol Flynn, the legendary swashbuckler of the Adventures of Robin Hood, made sure his burial request was just as bold and extravagant as the life he led. When Flynn passed away in the late 1950s, he was buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in California. But his final wish? To take one of his most treasured possessions with him, a 6-foot-long statue of a woman. This striking statue, a centerpiece in his home, was said to represent his lavish, hedonistic lifestyle and deep admiration for beauty. However, the request was ultimately denied. It was simply too impractical. Instead, Flynn was laid to rest with only a modest marker, a surprisingly simple farewell for a man who had lived life with such over-the-top extravagance. There's one more detail that makes Flynn's farewell even more intriguing. His funeral was a small, intimate gathering, attended only by close friends and family, a surprisingly quiet goodbye for a man whose life had been anything but. Though his final burial wish wasn't fully granted, it offers a revealing glimpse into the mind of a man who lived without regrets, Jean Harlow. Jean Harlow, Hollywood's original blonde bombshell, left behind a legacy of glamour, heartbreak, and a burial story that still captivates fans today. When she passed away in the late 1930s at just 26 years old, the world was left in shock. One of its brightest stars had burned out far too soon. Her final wish was simple, yet profoundly symbolic. She wanted to be buried in a white gown, surrounded by white flowers, in a white marble crypt. This wasn't just a tribute to her platinum blonde persona. It was her way of ensuring she'd be remembered as pure and untarnished, despite the scandals and sorrows that had haunted her tragically short life. Harlow's final resting place lies within the Great Mausoleum at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in California. Many don't know. Her crypt wasn't paid for by the studio or her family, but by her heartbroken lover, William Powell. Even in death, Jean Harlow's story remained one of beauty, mystery, and timeless glamour. Mary Pickford. Mary Pickford, America's sweetheart, and one of early Hollywood's most influential women, made a deeply personal burial request, one that spoke to her devotion to both her family and her legacy. When she passed away in the late 1970s, she was laid to rest at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in California, but her final resting place was anything but ordinary. She chose to be interred in the Garden of Memory, a peaceful, secluded section of the cemetery, alongside her mother and siblings. This heartfelt decision served as a powerful reminder that, despite Despite achieving unparalleled fame and fortune, family always remained at the heart of her life. What makes Pickford's burial even more fascinating is the inscription on her crypt, America's Sweetheart, a title she had both cherished and struggled with throughout her life. Her resting place is modest and peaceful, a quiet tribute to a woman who helped shape Hollywood yet often felt trapped by the pressures of fame. Mary Pickford's final wish wasn't about glitz or spectacle. It was about finding solace alongside the people she loved most, a striking contrast to the larger-than-life persona she brought to the silver screen. Rudolph Valentino, the original Latin lover and one of Hollywood's first true sex symbols, left behind a burial story as dramatic as his films. When he died suddenly in the mid-1920s at just 31, the world was devastated. Though he never left behind a formal burial request, his friends and family made sure his final resting place honored his legendary status. Valentino was laid to rest in a borrowed crypt at Hollywood Forever Cemetery, meant to be a temporary arrangement, yet it has now lasted nearly a century. That crypt, originally owned by a friend, has since become a shrine for devoted fans, many of whom still make pilgrimages to visit him to this day. One of the most haunting mysteries surrounding Valentino's burial is the legend of the Lady in Black, a shadowy figure who appeared every year on the anniversary of his death, leaving a single red rose at his grave. Greta Garbo. Greta Garbo, the mysterious screen legend who famously declared, "I want to be alone," stayed true to those words, even in death. When she passed away in the early 1990s, her final wish reflected her lifelong need for privacy and solitude. She chose to be cremated and buried in her homeland of Sweden, far from the Hollywood spotlight that had once defined her. Her ashes were laid to rest in a simple grave at Skogskyrkogården Cemetery in Stockholm, a UNESCO World Heritage Site known for its peaceful beauty. Perhaps the most intriguing detail, Garbo had secured her burial plot decades earlier, in the 1950s, long before her passing. This decision wasn't just practical, it was deeply symbolic. After decades of self-imposed exile in New York City, it was her way of reconnecting with her roots. Even in death, Garbo remained as mysterious as ever. Her grave is marked by a simple headstone with only her name, a stark contrast to the larger-than-life persona she embodied on screen. Mae West. Mae West, the undisputed queen of double, made sure her burial reflected the bold, unforgettable woman she was. When she passed away in the late 1980s, she was laid to rest in Cypress Hills Cemetery in Brooklyn, New York, the city where her story began. Rather than choosing Hollywood, she opted for the family mausoleum, a decision that spoke to her lifelong connection to her roots, despite her reign as a silver screen icon. But what truly makes her burial legendary? The inscription on her crypt, "Mae West, I'm no angel," a clever nod to one of her most famous films, and a perfect tribute to a woman who lived life on her own terms, breaking the rules at every turn. There's one more detail that makes Mae West's burial even more captivating. She was laid to rest in a gown she had personally chosen years before her death, a dazzling ensemble that proved her belief in always being ready for the spotlight. Even in the afterlife, Mae West's burial wasn't just a farewell, it was a final, show-stopping performance, a testament to her unshakable wit, timeless charm, and refusal to conform. For a woman who famously declared, "You only live once, but if you do it right, once is enough." Her resting place is the perfect reflection of a life lived entirely on her own terms. W.C. Fields. W.C. Fields, the legendary comedian with a razor-sharp wit and a deep disdain for convention, left behind a burial request as quirky as his humor. Despite spending much of his career in Hollywood, Fields had a lifelong aversion to California. He even joked that his epitaph should read, "On the whole, I'd rather be in Philadelphia," a perfect nod to both his hometown and his signature dry humor. Yet, in a twist of fate, Fields was ultimately laid to rest at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in California, but his grave marker? It doesn't bear the famous epitaph he had so often joked about. Instead, Fields' grave is marked by a simple plaque, a surprisingly modest tribute for a man who lived with such flair and irreverence. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. Fields had originally intended to be buried in Philadelphia, yet his family ultimately chose California instead, citing logistical challenges. This decision has sparked endless speculation. Was it an unfortunate twist of fate, or the ultimate irony for a man who spent his life mocking the very state he was buried in? Even in death, Fields left behind a legacy of humor, contradiction, and just a hint of mystery, ensuring his name, like his legendary one-liners, would never be forgotten. Theda Bara. Theda Bara, one of the most mysterious stars of the silent film era, remained just as enigmatic in death as she was in life. Dubbed Hollywood's original vamp, she mesmerized audiences with her dark, seductive roles and an aura of intrigue carefully crafted by the studios. But her final burial request? It was a shocking contrast to the dramatic, otherworldly persona she embodied on screen. When she passed away in the mid-1950s, Bara chose cremation, requesting that her ashes be scattered in the Pacific Ocean. This was an unusual choice for the time, as cremation wasn't widely practiced in mid-20th century America, especially not for a Hollywood legend, her burial wish reflecting a desire to return to nature, far from the artificial glamour of Hollywood. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like this video and comment below which Hollywood legend story surprised you the most. Also consider subscribing to the channel so you never miss our latest videos. Thanks for watching.